Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the Pride Center's podcast, Open Closet. Our first episode is entitled Managing Stress in a Pandemic. That's a collaboration with Counseling and Psychological Services, featuring Dr. Arthur Rittmeister. Welcome, Arthur. How are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to talk to you because we're dealing with some really uncertain times right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks have been struggling, so I'm glad we're having this opportunity to talk about it and hopefully have some folks for all our listeners to kind of walk away with. That'll be helpful.
Would you mind sharing your name, pronouns, and position just so folks know how to reach you and what they should refer you by?
Sure. So my name is Arthur Rittmeister. I'm one of the psychologists at CAPS. I'm pretty informal, so you can just call me Arthur. I use he, him, his pronouns. And I've been working at CAPS for 2 years now here at Cal Poly, seeing students and helping them out with mental health related concerns and really just providing support in whatever way we can. Got some really great workshops as well that folks can come to without needing to be seen, on an active basis by a counselor. So we've got some great stress management stuff that can be helpful. Yeah, and I've really been enjoying working with students and being on this campus. I'm glad to be part of this podcast and hopefully leaving some pearls of wisdom.
Yeah, that sounds good. Would you mind sharing a bit about your background and your education, as well as if you've worked at anywhere else besides Cal Poly Pomona?
Yeah, I've did my grad school in upstate New York. I was at the University at Albany where I got my PhD. And then I was originally in Santa Barbara for undergrad. I went to UC Santa Barbara, and so I really wanted to make my way back to California after grad school. And so actually ended up back at Santa Barbara for a year for internship, and then was up in the San Francisco Bay Area for my postdoc at St. Mary's College, and then came to Cal Poly Pomona.
Wow, that sounds great. I'm sure Albany was a little bit different of weather than Southern California, but I'm sure you're happy to be back in
Lots of snow and ice and wind up there.
Yeah, that's no fun. Well, thanks for joining us today. And I think, it's a really, really trying time for folks. And so I think it would be really good if we could engage in a conversation around the pandemic, and for folks who are quarantined and for folks who are maybe experiencing some higher levels of stress and anxiety during this time. And so I know you have a few takeaways for us today, if you don't mind briefly touching upon them, and then we could dig deeper into what they actually mean.
Sure. Yeah. There were a couple of things that I think might be helpful to think about as you're, trying to make it through this pandemic and taking care of yourself. And I think one of those things that I want to talk about today is really how we're thinking about this experience right now, how we're kind of making sense of this as an acculturation experience. Acculturation is what we talk about when you transition from one culture to another, and we're in a very different culture now than we were 6 months ago. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and then also give some pointers on how you might take care of yourself during this time, having some self-compassion, as well as finding meaning in your life right now, even if that looks very different from the way that it did before.
Great. Yeah, I know when you talk about it being an acculturation experience of transitioning to another culture, I know I find myself, I feel like it's Groundhog Day every day because I just wake up in my home, I wake up in my bed, I do the same thing. Like I'm not driving to work anymore. I'm not walking on campus anymore. I'm not seeing my coworkers or students. And so I noticed that I've had to have like this mental shift from being comfortable in my office and being productive there, and even studying for school at a Starbucks. And I can't really do that anymore. And so I think thinking about like the places that I have attachment to, and knowing that I can't access them in the same way anymore, and I'm just in my home, maybe I'll go for a walk sometimes or go in my backyard, but other than that, I don't really leave very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what you're describing is something that a lot of people are struggling with, and I'm certainly struggling with those things that you're describing, exactly that. And I really identified with it when you described it as Groundhog Day, because I think all those cues that we usually have to give us our sense of time or change, we don't have as much of those anymore because we're in the same space every day. And I think really trying to find that routine in that is important, but it's also a lot harder than it was before. Uh, in a way, what I hear you describing is kind of a grief experience, right?
Mhm.
That we've lost these things that were really meaningful, these routines that we found comfort in, we found connection in. And that's something that I hear students talk about since the start of the pandemic, is that there is a lot of things that were meaningful to them, even if it's just the small things like getting a cup of coffee at Starbucks or playing volleyball outside with a group of people. That isn't there anymore. And so I think we're trying to kind of process that loss. And then I hear students say as well, everybody's going through that, so why
Mm.
do I get to complain about it? But even though
Yeah.
everyone's going through it at once, it doesn't make it any less real, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one thing that I've learned is like everyone's experience is valid with it, and knowing that everyone is experiencing this just in different ways. And one of my cohort members from my program shared with me that she had heard it described as being like a storm that everyone's experiencing, and some people just have different types of boats. And so the storm may impact them in different ways, and it could be financially, right? It could be emotionally or mentally. It could be perhaps a change in their family and friend dynamic. And so that has been a big adjustment for folks. And I think even thinking about the Pride Center for like a physical space for people to come together. And while thinking about it as just objects, right? Like this is a couch, this is a lounge, this is a table that we sit at. It really is different to be able to engage with others, not being able to gather in a physical space anymore.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that those things that it seems like it's just physical things, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of emotional meaning attached to it. And a space
Mm-hmm.
like what you're describing, for some people that means safety. It means the space where they were able to be open, where they could be themselves, where they could feel connected with other people. And
Mm-hmm.
it that is, if you're bringing up the idea of boats, I think for other people, for some people, home is that safe boat, it's that safe space, and for other people it's not the safe
Mm-hmm.
space. And maybe both people would call it home, but it's a very different experience that has a very different emotional meaning. And I think that's something that's important to really acknowledge and not minimize, because
Yeah.
losing that sense of comfort is
Mm-hmm.
that's hard.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so I know that for myself, I mean, I'm thinking about ways to go about navigating that, right? To go about navigating potentially like this physical separation from friends, or maybe family that's not biological family, and community. And so I know for me, I've been texting people more, maybe doing video calls, talking on Instagram, just sharing memes even to
Hmm.
communicate what I'm feeling, even though they're usually cynical and sarcastic. It still
Hmm.
kind of brings me joy in knowing that someone is experiencing something similar to me, and it can be validating even through humor, is
Hmm.
usually the way that I deal with things. And so I know, I'm wondering, like, do you have any tips for folks on how to stay connected or how to reground themselves during this time?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's super important to really stay in touch with people. And
Mm-hmm.
it takes more intentionality now, because we have a lot of structures in our brain that really pick up on nonverbal cues about body language, just being in the same space with people, and that activates different areas of our brain that we use for to find fulfillment in social interactions. And we don't that doesn't necessarily get activated over Zoom because we don't have all of those cues, or it doesn't get activated over
Mm,
social media. And so what I hear from a lot of folks is that they're starting to feel more withdrawn, or that it's harder to find meaning in those interactions, and folks become more isolated. And so
mhm,
it takes more intentionality now to really say, no, I might not feel like it, but let me set up that Zoom date with a friend anyway, or set up that lunch with someone over Zoom, that maybe I don't feel like it when I'm scheduling it, but then when I'm sitting with that person, I am connecting and I am maintaining that contact, because I think it's so important to have those supports now, and to maintain those relationships, so that A, we're not feeling alone, but that we're also giving ourselves something to look forward to right now, because we're
mm.
having that Groundhog Day experience. It's really important to have that lunch date to look forward to at the end
Mhm.
of the week, or just something that maybe you plan with the people that you're staying with, whether that's just a movie night or a game night. It doesn't have to be big, but something that gives you something to look forward to, and kind of keeps you connected with time as well, so that it doesn't all blur together.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know I have something scheduled for Sunday with one of my closest friends, and it was her birthday. And so she texted all the queers in our friend group or her friend group and said, "Hey, let's get together for my 40th." And we're actually doing this, it's like queer history from someone who lives in the UK, who's a
Hmm.
Black woman who is going to talk to us about the history of LGBT folks in that area in the world. And so it'll be really neat to be able to talk to her and engage with her. And we're doing it over Zoom. It's actually through Airbnb experiences. And so there's a lot of Airbnb or different experiences now online. And it is monetary. It was, I think, $13. So that might be something if people want to look into. And it is helpful to have it on my calendar to know that it's happening, and almost forcing myself in a way to commit to showing up for it. And I
Hmm.
think that's good for me to have that on my calendar, to know that it's going to happen.
Hmm. It's making me think a little bit about this idea of adjusting to a new culture, right? That we were kind of speaking about in the beginning, because we're trying to find, in a way, we're trying to find a new life for ourselves that happens with the pandemic. And I think part of grief can be this experience of denial, right? To say, I don't want this pandemic, I don't like what's happening, I want this to be over. And so we spend a lot of time waiting for something that we don't necessarily have a lot of control over, whether
Mm-hmm.
that'll happen. So I think part of making that adjustment, and acculturating to life with COVID, and this new remote culture, is to find things that we can engage with, that give meaning,
Yep.
right? And like what you're describing, having something you can put on your calendar to look forward to, something that you're doing for yourself, that's different from what you might have done before, but it's something new in your life now. That those are the things that we can do to really take care of ourselves right now, to acculturate.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, like, I know for me, I've been working out every day for the past like month because I hired a trainer to force myself to get back into it.
Hmm.
And like for me, that's really regrounding, and also playing video games. Do you have any thoughts on how folks can cope? I think especially for students who may be at home and maybe their parents aren't very affirming or supportive on maybe what they could do even if they're feeling overwhelmed or anxious. I know for me, I've used the app Headspace, and it's actually free right now for students and just folks who live in LA County. And so I know for me, that's been really helpful to do some breathing exercises, and even like helps me sleep. Like there's specific sessions that are for people when they're trying to fall asleep. Do you have any thoughts on that, or in those moments if people are feeling really overwhelmed?
Yeah. Well, I think you're asking about a couple of things there that are all really important. I think that there is the in the moment self-care that we can do. Our life before COVID, the pace of our life before COVID was much faster than we're really wired to deal with. And so for a lot of folks, life with COVID has kind of slowed down. And I think it's really okay to let yourself slow down with that as well. It's different, but we're kind of at a healthier pace of life right now where we're able to get more sleep, that we're able to give ourselves the time to go work out. I totally relate to what you're saying because I'm a lot healthier now with COVID than I was before because I have the time to go on walks and take care of myself. I think for folks that are with families that might not be affirming, that it's important to stay connected to sources of support that are affirming, to community that's affirming. Sometimes I think people can do that by, listening to things like podcasts. Like maybe you're not necessarily talking while you're listening to this, but you have a sense of community by, listening to people that might give you positive messages or things that you're feeling good about. But also, maybe you could tell your family like, hey, I'm going to go for a walk, just kind of get some fresh air, and have that be the time that you call a friend and you have a conversation with someone. And if they're in a similar boat, maybe they're going for a walk too. And even though you're not in the same physical space, you kind of know, hey, I'm on a walk together with my friend, and finding your connection that way. Apps can certainly be helpful, but it's a little step away from that human connection, right? And Headspace is a good one. Stop, Breathe, Think is another one that's good.
Oh, okay. I haven't heard of that one. That one's cool.
Yeah. Calm is another one. I'm trying to remember what the other ones are. We've actually got, I think, like 16 listed on the CAPS website. So it's kind of a shameless plug for that, but you can check out cpp.edu/CAPS. And there's a link there for resources. It's got a whole bunch of apps that you can use.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I'm glad to know that there's options for students if maybe they're not wanting to necessarily schedule an appointment or go to a group session, that there's more that they can do independently, and maybe even in the privacy of just their phone or in their bedroom, or maybe when they're going for a walk. And so that's accessible. And I know, like I had mentioned, that a lot of the apps right now are offering free access because of the times. So I'm glad to hear that. Is there, I'm wondering before we wrap up, what have you been doing to stay regrounded, unless you have any additional tips that you want to add to what we've already talked about?
Yeah, I think this might answer both. I think for one, I've really been trying to be compassionate with myself. That at first I was frustrated with myself that I wasn't feeling more motivated. I was frustrated with myself that I wasn't being able to concentrate as well as I was before. I was frustrated that I couldn't get out of the house. And it really helped me to say, well, but this is okay. This is a really unusual time that we're in. These are normal reactions to really abnormal circumstances. We don't have a pandemic every year, right? The last one was in 1918. And so maybe this happens once every 100 years, maybe even less than that. So kind of having compassion with yourself. So if you're not feeling motivated and you don't have that pressing deadline, maybe let yourself feel unmotivated and kind of take care of that in the moment and be gentle with yourself. And the other thing that I found really helpful is figuring out some projects for myself that kind of gave my life meaning. I had a whole list of things that I've been telling myself for 10 years, 20 years. I'm not going to go higher than that because it's going to make me feel older than I'd like. But things that I've wanted to do for a really, really, really long time and never got around to because the pace of life was so high. And this has been that opportunity to say, well, you know what, that thing that I wanted to do for the last 15 years, I'm going to explore that. And maybe I don't like it, but it's something that I finally got to try out for myself. And I think some folks struggle more with being indoors than other folks. And if it's hard to not be able to go to the gym, that you're kind of finding those little projects for yourself that that you really enjoy doing, and maybe it was that instrument you wanted to play when you were 5, and this might be the time to kind of just learn about it and check things out about it. So those are just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I know for me, I'll share a bit about what I've been doing before we go, but I've been playing video games more, trying not to let it overtake work and or my PhD program, but Animal Crossing has been my jam, as well as binge watching 90 Day Fiance, which is complete trash. And it's nice to just check out of reality, right? And I think that's coping of just not engaging with what's happening and doing it in moderation, and also taking a break from social media, I think sometimes has been really good, because some days I'll just go on maybe twice in a day, and some other days I notice I'm spending too much time because there goes a half an hour of me scrolling. And with the way everything is right now in this country, with beyond the pandemic, it's exhausting. And so I think it's good to be able to take a break sometimes. And so I kind of push myself to do that, just to stop and pause and breathe. So before we go, how can students reach you? Should they just call the CAPS phone number or email CAPS in order to make an appointment in case they're interested?
Yeah, so one of the things students can do is go on our website. We're really trying to keep that up to date with the services that we're offering. So right now we've got different workshops that you can do, and you can just sign up for that on the website. There's a link to RSVP, so you don't have to be a client at CAPS. And a lot of that has to do with stress management. If you'd like counseling to get individual support, or check out some of the groups that we're developing, those are great ways of staying connected. You can either give us a call at 909-869-3220. That number is also on our website. Just leave a voicemail with your name, Bronco ID, phone number, and best times to reach you, or send an email to caps@cpp.edu with that same information, and somebody will get back to you that same day and help you plan out those next steps.
Great. And just to confirm, the services are included, right, in university fees if someone is taking classes, right? So there's no additional cost.
That's right. So all the CAPS services are included in your student health fee, and we're still offering individual therapy. We're doing everything remotely right now to make sure that you're staying healthy and the campus is staying healthy, but we're able to do therapy and groups and workshops. So if you feel like you want that support, I really encourage folks to reach out, because no additional cost, and maybe you can help find that sense of support or connectedness.
Great. Well, thank you, Arthur. It's been wonderful having you, and I'm so glad you're able to join us on our first ever episode of Closet.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome. And so I'm looking forward to maybe having you back on and seeing how you're doing in a few months. And I'm super excited about the podcast. So for our listeners, please stay engaged and know that we're going to be publishing these as often as we can, and also keeping our own wellness in mind. So thank you for listening, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
All right, thanks. Take care, everyone.